Howdy everyone. So this is the top cowling removed, and you can see that the hinges are in place with the fuel tank sealant as well as riveted. Slightly under riveted because you don't want to put a lot of stress into the fiberglass. Fuel tank sealant is very hard to clean off of fiberglass because the fiberglass is pretty rough. And of course, pretty much trying to get the fuel tank sealant out from between the knuckles is almost impossible, but that's the best I could do with what I have, and those are now in and complete. So I am now working on the hinge for the oil cooler door. So here's the hinge finished, and you can see that it is also riveted in place. I chose not to do fuel tank sealant on these hinges just because they shouldn't really see a lot of stress. There shouldn't be a lot of tension on the hinges, on the hinge itself. I'm hoping that once the door is in place and riveted like you see here, and I've got it latched on the other side, that you really shouldn't see a whole lot of stress. So I didn't think it was necessary to do the fuel tank sealant. That will, that's yet to be seen, of course, in the future if that's a requirement. But for now, I'm just going to fly it as is, and we'll see what we end up with. So now, my next step is to figure out how I am going to latch this door shut. And here's my plan. I've seen this done before, so it's not a new idea, but I am going to use more piano hinge. I'm going to attach piano hinge to the cowling somehow, and I'm going to attach it to the door somehow. Of course, I can't do that one-handed. Well, anyway, attach half a hinge to the door, half a hinge to the cowling, and then use a hinge pin to attach the two. And that hinge pin is going to come all the way across, and I believe it hooks into, there are some fiberglass pieces that will go in here. They're basically like almost like baffling, but they're to help the airflow that comes in to flow evenly across the cylinders. You don't want it to come in here and then be turbulent. And I believe those hinge pins run all the way and somehow hook into that. So when you want to open up the oil cooler door, you reach in the inlet and you pull the pin out so that the door releases. That's the plan. I'm not entirely there yet. I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm just now starting to figure out how long to make the hinge. The hinge can't be too long because the hinge on the door, of course, has got to fit this opening so that it can open. And I need to figure out placement, where to put the hinge, and also the thickness of the cowling has to be considered. So with the door shut, you can't simply rivet the hinge onto the cowling and the hinge onto the door, because you won't be able to get the pin in because the hinge halves will be offset. So I need to make a shim to bring the hinge on the door up flush with the cowling, and then I can rivet together, all of that together. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, is figuring out how thick of a shim I need, and then I can shim the hinge half flush with the cowling hinge half. So those are the details I'm working on now. When I get something figured out, I'll put it on video. Talk to you guys later. Howdy everyone. Alrighty, so what am I doing here? I am working on the piano hinge that will go here that is basically going to be the latch to hold this door shut. Right now I've got the door taped on the back side so it will stay closed. And I believe I've talked about the fact that there's going to be a hinge half on the door, and there's going to be another half of hinge on the cowling, but they are not on the same plane because the door is actually on the outside. So to make up the difference between this face and this face, I had to make up some spacers, right? If I just went ahead and riveted this hinge half directly to the door and the other hinge half up here, the knuckles would not line up and I won't be able to get the hinge pin in. So I measured the thickness of the cowling, got some scrap pieces of aluminum, and I made up 2 simple spacers. And these, of course, will get riveted in place along with the hinge so that the knuckles on this hinge will line up with the knuckles on this hinge. So these will basically sit together somewhere up here. The other thing to consider is obviously you want the hinge that gets mounted to the door, you want it to be short enough lengthwise. Otherwise, the ends of the hinge could interfere with the cowling here and here when you go to open and close the door. Remember, this hinge is going to be attached to the door, so it needs to be able to fit within this opening. The other thing to consider, depending on how you make your corners on the cowling, the hinge is also going to have to clear those corners. So this hinge cannot go up on this seam or near this seam because the knuckles catch these corners of the cowling. And again, if you jam this up in here tight and rivet it, you're going to have a little bit of a difficult time getting the door open and closed because the corner of the hinge is going to interfere with the cowling. So what I've decided to do was I wanted this edge of the door to be nice and secure. So I made this hinge as long as I felt comfortable making it. At this point, I'm going to just set it back a little bit from the front edge. Of course, that's an exaggeration. Rather than having it jammed up here, I'm just going to back it up like a 16th or an 1/8. And then I'm going to center it left and right. So I'm going to back it down and center it. So now you can see how far away the knuckles are in relation to the edge of the cowling. From the knuckle to this edge here, the hinge is set inboard quite a bit. So the solution to that is to use a hinge on the cowling that has a longer leg, I guess this would be considered a leg, I'm not sure, but you want a wider hinge so that you can offset it toward the door and still have enough material to rivet it. Now you'll notice, if I haven't talked about it before, I'm using the really nice extruded hinge, so that the knuckles of the hinge are part of, is that going to focus? It's trying. The knuckles are not rolled like most hinges. These are extruded aluminum and they're all one piece. The only reason I'm using this is because I have it. And you can see the part number there. It's MS 2001-3. And the -3, I believe, maybe I shouldn't say that. Anywho, that's what that hinge is. And then I also had, fortunately, this other kind of hinge, and this is MS 2001-6. I think the -3 and the -6 are in relation to the thickness of the main body of the hinge. So now this hinge will go to rivet to the door, just like I had explained, and then this hinge here is wide enough that I can offset it into the door, but still have enough material to get it riveted onto the cowling. And you also note that this hinge is longer than the hinge that's going to go on the door, and that's on purpose. I want it to kind of span across the opening. So this hinge is going to get riveted something like that onto the cowling. The door hinge, of course, will be mounted to the door. And then, like I said, the hinge pin is going to be pulled out from this intake opening. And I'll get to that when I get there. So right now, I'm going to try to figure out where to rivet these hinges, get them laid out on the door, get them laid out on the cowling, mark them, drill them, and get to riveting. I see my battery is going to die, but another note real quick, I had talked about using fuel tank sealant on these hinges and cleaning off the excess fuel tank sealant. I have since gone back and cleaned out the fuel tank sealant between each knuckle, because I realized when I put the hinge, or when I put the cowling halves together, the fuel tank sealant that's in between here interferes with the mating knuckles that need to go down in between. And that was causing me a little bit of fit issue and a little bit of issue getting the hinge pins in. So I got that all cleaned up, and I'm assuming that it will fit together a lot better. I haven't tried it yet since I've cleaned all that fuel tank sealant out. It wasn't much, but I did take the time to clean out between each and every knuckle on this top cowling. Okay, let me get some stuff going here, and I will talk to you guys later.